All right, we're taking a listen to Jake Sullivan there at the White House press briefing, talking about the conversation that was had, the phone call had between Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu and President Joe Biden. They hadn't spoken, by the way, in 32 days. Two of the standout moments, I believe, to me were the statement about whether or not Israel actually had a plan when it came to defeating Hamas. Well, they have the shared goal of defeating Hamas. What, in fact, was the plan to do so? And then they talked about the incursion in to Rafah and sending a delegation from Israel to talk about their plan when it comes to a ground incursion into Rafah. I want to bring in Peter Alexander, NBC's chief White House correspondent, to talk more about this. I think one of the moments also, Peter, that stood out was when he said, yes, this delegation is coming, right? Netanyahu has agreed to send this delegation to the United States, but the prime minister already has his own idea of what he is going to do in Rafah. And he has made this quite clear.
Well, let's be clear. The backdrop to this conversation today, they've only had 4 year to date. The last one was February 15th. There's the tension between these two men, two very different visions of the way this should be playing out and the way that it is playing out right now. So what was striking was, as we heard from Sullivan, that they have now, the U.S. has asked for this delegation of political, humanitarian, and military leaders to come to the United States, to Washington, D.C., Yasmin, as you noted, and to discuss alternatives to an incursion into Rafah right now. He noted all the reasons why that is a problem in the views of the United States, more than 1 million Palestinians who are there. It is a border crossing, as we're much of the aid, though not nearly enough, is coming in the U.S. right now, and it's along the border with Egypt, which has its own concerns right now. But to the point that you made, the real issue is that, as he acknowledged, the Israelis, as he said, have a very different opinion on this. So the idea that they're going to come and say, hey, here's your opinion, here's our opinion, and find some middle ground seems very challenging. They literally are at odds in their view of this right now. And there are all sorts of ramifications here. Let's start with the humanitarian ramifications right now. The United Nations right now saying that famine is imminent in northern Gaza, that there are 677,000 Palestinians in that country right now who are near starvation, a number they say will only grow if it's not addressed quickly. You literally have the World Central Kitchen, Jose Andres' organization, bringing in food because not enough aid is coming in. There is no U.S. effort to this point, though there will be in the future, to build a pier to bring in aid there. So that's the humanitarian issue, which is dramatic, which is dire. You have the political issue for the president at home, who is facing real ramifications domestically from not just Arab and Muslim Americans, but from a lot of Americans, specifically in states like Michigan, as we witnessed most recently, and their primary for roughly 100,000 voters there who cast their votes for uncommitted, to send a real message to the president of the United States. And of course, you have the military objective. The president views this very differently than Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has said that he wants to see a two-state solution. And what strikes me is another reminder. It was only a matter of days ago that Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat, the top American Jew in the halls of Congress, in the White House, anywhere, spoke out and basically said that there needs to be a transition. There needs to be new governance in that country. So this was a big moment, I think, and it just underscores the real tensions and how far they are from solutions.
Quickly here, is there a sense at all inside the White House that Netanyahu will listen at this point to the president, that the president has any influence really over the prime minister anymore?
Well, I think as evidenced by this right now, it's clear that they are at odds, and that's why you're hearing increasingly from those members of Congress right now, including some Democrats who are saying, hey, we should condition aid. The United States should say, unless more is done to help those people, the Palestinian people who are facing starvation, famine right now, that the U.S. should not continue to send weapons to Israel right now. Benjamin Netanyahu, though, he does still have strong support across Israel, not all satisfied with his politics, not all satisfied certainly with the fact that October 7th occurred the way that it did or at all. But the bottom line is there's certainly still a lot of people in Israel that are worried about their neighbors on the border, and Hamas still controls so much of Gaza.
Peter Alexander, thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.